Now let's discuss the question of whether or not paranormal belief in and of itself is reasonable. Richard Dawkins, who is a very well-known atheist, um, apologist, and sympathizer, argues in his book Unweaving the Rainbow that we should follow the philosopher from the Enlightenment, David Hume, in asking whether it is more difficult to believe or to disbelieve that any miracle or paranormal event has occurred. If it is more difficult to believe in that paranormal event, then it probably did not occur. He says, what we need is less gasping and more thinking, to take the sting out of coincidence by quietly sitting down and calculating the likelihood that something would have happened anyway. Now, when we think about paranormal phenomena, this becomes a fundamental argument against the phenomena that we should assume always that these phenomena, no matter how strange or inexplicable they may seem, have some explanation in the physical world. The difficulty becomes when we are unable to conjure such an explanation, when these phenomena remain to some extent unexplained. And this is not only a problem for parapsychology and the paranormal. In fact, this we see in fields as diverse as quantum physics, neuroscience. For the paranormal, Eric Good, a sociologist, offers us this idea. It's called the irreducible minimum. He says that if even a single instance of any of these paranormal phenomena that claim to exist do exist or work, then the paranormal principle is valid. No matter how many paranormal occurrences we explain away as perfectly natural in origin, there will always be a pestering collection of instances that have not yet or cannot be adequately explained. So even though we know that the Amityville Horror, for example, has been disproven, that this was in fact a hoax, there are countless other haunted houses in the world that have yet to undergo the same level of scrutiny that the Amityville Horror has been subjected to. And maybe they could be scrutinized, but even under scrutiny, there would be a certain percentage of those that would eke beyond the limits of explanation. This is the irreducible minimum. But as Good points out, if I tell you that it's possible for me to hit a barn with an arrow at 1,000 paces, and I fire 1,000 arrows and 999 of them miss the barn, but one hits the barn, I've proven to you that it is indeed possible. The same is true of ghosts. If there is even one ghost in the world, then ghosts exist. If even one medium can demonstrate beyond a doubt that that medium is able to communicate with the spirits of the dead, then the principle of mediumship is valid. It, it becomes, in that sense, very difficult to disprove the paranormal because it is always eking into the far reaches of the limits of evidence. So these are the terms by which the paranormal adherents and paranormal skeptics or opponents go at the debate over whether paranormality is in fact a reasonable presumption. The opponents of paranormal belief argue that paranormal belief is largely unfounded and has almost nothing to do with a critical examination of evidence. Paranormalism is based on the false notion that there is a non-material dimension to reality. So our opponents generally adhere to the notion that reality is 100% material. Materialistic view that is endemic in many scientific communities. Adherents argue that skeptics have a bias against paranormal phenomena that prevents them from approaching these phenomena in a fair-minded manner. Skeptics suffer from unquestioned materialist assumptions. Finally, it is true that we cannot know whether or not the universe is entirely or even fundamentally material. There may be other dimensions of reality that are spiritual or simply non-material in some way. And when we get to questions of quantum physics and the notion of multiple universes and all the various ideas that have popped out of post-Einsteinian theories, it certainly seems conceivable, even from a scientific perspective, that we are far from having a full grasp on the nature of our universe. We could consider that this debate is, in fact, based on a spurious or a false premise that there is this dichotomy between the material and the spiritual, that each side bases its argument on a fundamental assumption, which forms their respective framework for reality. The paranormal component can't really be selected out from that assumption and specifically addressed without bearing back on the larger assumption, i.e., that the universe is entirely material or that the universe is not entirely material. If we hold the universe to be entirely material, this informs everything about our worldview. It's a necessary element of our way of being, and we can't simply allow for the paranormal within that larger worldview. It simply doesn't fit. And so when we say this may be a ghost to a person who holds this viewpoint, it's simply not possible for that to surface within that person's conception of the world. On the other hand, if a person is open to believing in the possibility of a non material world, then introducing the prospect of something that could be non material then maybe necessarily leads to a bias toward believing that this thing is non material. It could be that paranormal belief in and of itself is an exaptation, which is a spandrel that turned out to be useful and so was subsequently selected for by evolutionary pressures. A spandrel is a biological feature that is passed down part or parcel with another trait and is not on its own a product of natural selection. So in the case of paranormal belief, we're talking about our search for minded agency for survival. In other words, imagine that we are all cave people in the bush and we are hunting for dinner. We may hear something rustle beside us. That sound of something rustling in the trees may be nothing, maybe the wind, but it is within our best interest to believe that that rustle belongs to a potential predator. We will err on the side of caution and we will prevent being killed in this instance if we imagine that there is a mind behind that rustle, even if it is only the wind. If we imagine that it could be a tiger or a leopard, that puts us in better stead. We are more likely to survive. And if we imagine that and we're wrong, we survive nevertheless. It doesn't hurt us to imagine a mind into those rustling leaves. And this, theoretically, through a process of evolution, could lead us to the notion that there is a God, or that there are spirits, that there are minded agencies independent of what we could conceive to be physical minds, independent of animals or human beings. We go from these rustling leaves to these supernatural beings. However, even taking that into account, if it's true that our cognitive systems weigh our experiences and conclude that there is at least one God out there, we cannot take this conclusion as evidence that our cognitive faculties are mistaken. All of us are capable of weighing this case to varying degrees, but intelligent people can evaluate whether or not there is a God, and intelligent people, or spirits or ghosts for that matter, and intelligent people can come to the conclusion that there is one, just as intelligent people can come to the conclusion that there is not. In neither case can anyone rule out the possibility that there is a God. We can only come back to our assumption of how the world works. Our assumption being either that the world is entirely material or that it is not, that there are some non-material elements. We can only fall back on those, that worldview. And in that regard, it is perfectly reasonable to believe in the possibility of the ghost, just as it is perfectly reasonable to disbelieve. Finally, the ghost represents this area where both science and religion to a certain extent break down. The ghost can neither be absolutely proven nor absolutely disproven.